talking about how she wears a mask everywhere. And then there's all these people in the comments that are commenting on that. I only go to places when I know there's going to be minimal amounts of people. I always wear a mask. And they were all like, it was some weird echo chamber where they were all terrified still of what is now like a cold.
Well, I will resist portraying it as a cold because I do think that ain't where we are.
It's not a cold to you, right? When you got it, it was rough.
I got something that was pretty rough. But let's put that aside for a second.
Right.
Let's say that this is not a very severe disease. And by the way, I will just tell you, at the risk of opening old controversies, it took me a long time to understand that ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, they have broad applicability across RNA viruses. And many of the things that make us sick are RNA viruses, right? So there is a strong argument to be made that in a world where we are now being exposed to all of these RNA viruses, that acting quickly and taking those things is a reasonable thing to do. Now, hydroxychloroquine may have more toxicity than ivermectin. In fact, it does. But ivermectin has such a low toxicity that from the point of view of not doing the damage to the body that comes from being sick with these pathological agents, simply being reflexive about taking the stuff quickly is sensible. And of course, if what I just said is correct, you would expect pharma to look anywhere but there because they can't patent the stuff.
Right. Did you see Chris Cuomo on Patrick Bet-David's show admit that he's taking ivermectin now?
I heard about it. I didn't see it.
He admitted it. He admitted his doctor has him on ivermectin for long COVID, and he kept distinguishing the difference between long COVID and vaccine injuries. Like he said, had some sort of a vaccine injury. Then he was talking about how ivermectin is not good for COVID, but it's good for long COVID. And I'm like, what is long COVID? Long COVID's not even a thing. Like, stop saying that. Like, you're fucked up because either of COVID or you're fucked up because of the vaccine. One of those two things happened where you got damaged. Calling it long COVID is weird because it's like saying you're still sick from COVID. That's not really what happened. Okay, if you get pneumonia and you get lung damage, you don't have long pneumonia.
Right.
You just have you had damage to your lungs. It's not long COVID. So you're either taking ivermectin because your doctor said, like, what benefit would ivermectin have on long COVID? Like, what does that mean?
Well,
or vaccine injuries.
It has a benefit for vaccine injuries. We can just say that empirically. The people who have become successful at treating these things tell us this.
Which vaccine injuries?
COVID.
But which ones? Which specific vaccine injuries?
You mean what are the symptoms?
Yeah, what things?
Things like brain fog, fatigue, neuropathy, these things. And I actually have several friends who report that they were suffering badly. I sent them to Pierre. He treated them. Ivermectin was core to the treatment. And they report, I don't want to say miraculous, but spectacular recoveries.
Pierre, by Pierre, you're talking about Dr. Pierre Corey.
Yep.
Who, did he lose his license or something?
Yeah, I believe so, or it's in process. But they are punishing him for
talking about a beneficial medicine that happens to not be patentable.
Punishing him for doing his job.
Wild.
Yeah.
That's wild.
It's crazy.
That's crazy.
Yeah. That's diabolical, really.
It is diabolical. So what would be the mechanism as to which ivermectin would help these people?
I don't know. It has a number of different mechanisms. It's certainly an anti-inflammatory. You know, there's only so far that explanation will take you. But it, I don't know. I can't answer that question. But I can say it really doesn't much matter. If you're sick and it makes you better, that's what you want.
Right.
And, you know, what our understanding of how many medicines work is.
But isn't it bizarre when people that have been vaccinated not once, but multiple times and had side effects from the vaccine that they'll report openly? We'll talk about it and say it's long COVID while they're still suffering. It's almost like they alleviate themselves from any of the responsibility of making a terrible choice.
I think they're also being fed this story.
Right.
And we've seen that in multiple places. So, for example, you remember these long debates about, well, okay, yes, the mRNA shots do cause a certain amount of myocarditis, but not nearly as much as COVID.
And it goes away quick. That was the other thing they kept saying. It's temporary.
Yeah, which is nonsense. And it turns out now that the myocarditis appears to have been vaccine-induced myocarditis that was being, just like everything else happened with COVID. It was I don't want to say an accounting error. It was cynical. They shoved things into the wrong category.
Right. And they also pushed out a narrative that you get more myocarditis from the virus rather than you do from the vaccine.
Right, and apparently you don't get it from the virus.
Yeah, well, what you do is you get high troponin levels, right? And Asim Malhotra, he explained all this, is that when you test for that, you can assume if a person is suffering from a viral infection that they will have high troponin levels, but it doesn't mean they have myocarditis.
Right.
So you're calling it myocarditis without actually doing an MRI on the heart.
Right, and as I've pointed out in many different places, myocarditis is kind of a red herring anyway, because what it means is inflammation. And inflammation is there for a reason. There's an underlying pathology. And so the fact that we can detect that you have myocarditis means, well, okay, something's up with your heart. What is it? And the vaccines create damage in the heart. They create damage because they get taken up by heart cells. Those heart cells produce...
Explain the whole thing with the lipid nanoparticles so people understand why they cause damage.
So the way these shots were supposed to work is you have an mRNA transcript that is loaded into lipid nanoparticle. The lipid nanoparticles are injected. We were told that they stayed in the deltoid where they are injected. They do not. They circulate in the blood and lymph. Lipid nanoparticle. Lipid
and this is proven.
Yeah. Lipid nanoparticle. Lipid means fat. You may remember from high school chemistry that like dissolves like, so fats dissolve other fats. So you've got this thing encased in fat. Any cell it encounters is covered in fat. So it gets taken up by cells haphazardly around the body. Those cells take the message, the mRNA transcript, into the cytoplasm. They translate it into protein, and that protein gets exported to the surface of the cell. This is how the manufacturer wants it to work. Now, if it happened in your arm, okay. But if it happens in your heart, well, anywhere it happens, it will trigger your immune system to spot this antigen that it doesn't recognize. And T cells will come in and kill the cells that are making this foreign protein because in natural circumstances, anytime a cell makes a foreign protein, it has the signature of a virally infected cell. A cell is producing self-antigens and foreign antigens. That's a virally infected cell. No matter what place in the body it exists, the right thing to do is to destroy it. So the immune system comes in, T cells destroy that cell, and that leaves you with a wound, right? You've lost cells that were doing something. Most of the tissues of the body can tolerate a certain amount of that. But in your heart, you can't tolerate very much because the heart has an extremely low capacity to repair itself. It scars instead, and it takes time to scar. You have a wound until it scars over. So those wounds are vulnerabilities. If you're an athlete and you've got a wound in your heart that you don't know about, you could easily die because you have a weakened wall in the chambers of your heart and something breaches at the point that your blood pressure is high in the middle of some activity. So my point is, when we say myocarditis, we are effectively accepting a placeholder for there's an underlying pathology that we haven't found. And that pathology can be damage to the heart, which is very serious inherently. It compromises your lifetime capacity for your heart to function. And in the short term, it creates a substantial vulnerability to cardiac incidents.